I'd like to load a Sentinel-2 image over my study area of interest up here in far north Queensland, Australia. Now what I could do is to create some code from scratch to be able to do that, but what I prefer to do is find something similar that has already been done, and rather than reinvent the wheel, just make a few changes and modifications to make it meet my needs. So what I've got here is a piece of code that I created in a previous video that goes through working how to load Landsat image data. And it's really similar to load Sentinel data. So what I'd like to do is use that as my base, but then make some changes that I need to make. So what I'll do first of all is to go through the code and look at the Landsat specific components and then go through systematically and change those one by one. The first thing is that there's a variable created here called L8, which we want to be calling it Sentinel instead, or S2. And the image collection that it's calling is the Landsat 8 collection, which of course we want to look at the Sentinel-2 collection instead. Once we change the collection and the variable name, we'll need to change the variable that it's calling in this piece of code here on line 3. It's from L8 to the variable which will change to S2. I'm happy with the filtering date and the region of interest location, so they're all fine. But the next thing I need to look at is this variable for cloud cover, which is based in the metadata of Landsat, and it's actually called something different in Sentinel. So we need to make sure that we change that so that it is checking for the cloud coverage there. When it prints to the console, instead of calling it an L8 scene, let's call it a Sentinel scene instead. And then I would like to change the contrast stretch of the image that it loads based on my experience. So we're going to go through those various things and change them step by step. So here we go. I have my loading Landsat code up in the code editor. The first thing that I want to do is to do a save as, and I'm going to give myself a new script rather than adding on or altering this script itself, just in case I make mistakes, and I want to be able to keep this Landsat code by itself. Now, as you can see, my save button is grayed out. So all I need to do is just put a space somewhere in the code. It's not going to affect the code itself, but now you'll see that because there's been a change, my save button is now activated. So I'm going to use the pull down and do save as, and instead of calling it loading Landsat, let's call it loading Sentinel. Now, once we've got that, I know that I'm not going to affect my Landsat script, and I'm going to start fresh with Sentinel. So step by step, the first one was that we needed to remove the Landsat variable and instead put in the Sentinel one. So we can just hover over on the left-hand side, click the rubbish bin, and that will get rid of our Landsat image collection. And up the top here, I'm going to type in Sentinel and come down to the level C data. So I'm going to click on that one just to make sure that it is what I want. I can read the information here. I can have a look at the bands, and importantly, realize that band 4, band 3, band 2 is red, green, and blue, which is the same color combination for red, green, and blue as Landsat. So that's great if I want to load a true color image. It does get different if you want to load a false color though, so looking at band 8 being near infrared instead. Now over here on the image properties, the key thing to notice is the metadata variable cloud coverage assessment, which we'll use to rank the amount of cloud coverage in the data sets that are returned instead of cloud cover, which was what was used for Landsat. So I'm happy with this image collection. I'm going to import that. And as it does, instead of having the variable image collection, let's call it S2 instead, just nice and simple, which means that this is the next thing that I need to change. Instead of L8, it's going to be S2. And just remember that it is case sensitive. So we want to make sure that if we're using capitals there, it's capital there as well. We keep the filter date the same, region of interest, I'm still happy with that. And it's this cloud cover metadata variable that we need to change to cloud coverage assessment to make sense for Sentinel. As we scroll down a little bit further, instead of saying L8 scene, we're going to say a Sentinel scene. And then we can see our bands, band 432 being the same for red, green, and blue. But what I do want to change is this stretch, and I'm going to change that as a minimum value, a digital number of value of 0, and I'm going to change it to 3000 there. So they were all the things that I wanted to change. I am now going to save my code, and let's run it and see how we go. So as we do, we'll get the information for the metadata pop up in the console. You'll see that already we've zoomed into the Cairns region, which is where I had my region of interest. You'll see the scene that it has loaded. So this is from the 6th of September 2019. I can pull down the information there, look at all the metadata I want, and you'll see that I'm really quite happy with the satellite image that it's loaded. I can also turn it on and off if I want, and then also play with the stretch. So here's that 0 to 3000. If you want to change that and see the way it brightens or darkens the scene that you've loaded, or use custom stretches here, like the 1 or 2 standard deviations, etc., to have a bit of a play. So that's great. I've been able to load my Sentinel scene instead of Landsat. What if I now actually would like to do something similar, but perhaps I want to look at a false color composite, and I'm going to put the two of those on top of each other. So what we can do is we're already calling all the information to load the Sentinel-2 scene, but if I want that exact same one, but just in a different color composition. So the only parts of the code that I need to change are this bit here. So where we've got defining a visualization for a red, green, and blue composite, I'm going to copy that, and I'm actually just going to paste that exactly as it is below. But what I'm going to change, instead of doing a 4-3-2 for red, green, blue, let's say I want a standard false color composite. So I can go back up to the top and remind myself of the band combination that I want here by looking at the bands, and I might want to say band 8 for near infrared, band 4 for red, and band 3. So 8, 4, 3 is the band combination that I would like to use here. So I'm going to change this. I want an 8 and band 4 and band 3 here. What I want to make sure that instead of calling this true color, I'm now going to call this false color. I'm going to stay with the same stretch, and I'm going to change my my comments here to make sure that I don't confuse myself. So we can change all of this here. So 8, 4, and 3 needed for the RGB false color composite. And then the only other thing that we need to add is, instead of just adding our true color image here, we are also going to add the false color. So we're just going to copy that line of code and paste it in again, but this time change this variable from true color to false color, and let's change what it gets called in our layers as it drops down. So there's our true color image, and if we've done this correctly, then we'll get a false color image popping up there as well. So let's save that code there and run it and see how we go. Now everything should look exactly the same in terms of calling the image scene. It is the same, but the difference that should happen now is that we're loading two representations of this scene, one on top of the other. And as we come over to the layers, we'll see we do have our false color image and our true color image. So there's a way that you can load two versions of Sentinel image data based on the set parameters that you choose with a date, a region of interest, and low cloud coverage over your location.